One story we've been following closely is the U.S.'s relationship with China. For months, trade tensions between the U.S. and China had largely hushed, but now tensions are rising again as the Associated Press is saying that the two superpowers are thrusting their trade hostilities back in the global spotlight, roiling markets, and raising alarms of what might come next. And now we're seeing this week that China is announcing strict new limits on exports of rare earth minerals that are crucial to high-tech products. The AP saying that President Trump, in turn, is threatening an additional 100% tax on Chinese imports by November 1st and export controls on American software. Both sides also hit one another's ships with new port fees. A little bit of a lengthy Truth Social post from President Trump about this. I want to read this out. It has just been learned that China has taken an extraordinarily aggressive position on trade in sending an extremely hostile letter to the world, stating that they were going to, effective November 1st, impose large-scale export controls on virtually every product they make, and some not even made by them. This affects all countries, without exception, and was obviously a plan devised by them years ago. It is absolutely unheard of in international trade, and a moral disgrace in dealing with other nations. Based on the fact that China has taken this unprecedented position, and speaking only for the USA and not other nations who were similarly threatened, starting November 1st or sooner, depending on any further actions or changes taken by China, the U.S. will impose a tariff of 100% on China over and above any tariff that they are currently paying. Also on November 1st, we will impose export controls on any and all critical software. It is impossible to believe that China would have taken such an action, but they have, and the rest is history. Thank you for your attention to this matter, the president says. Hal Kemper, still standing by with me here. As President Trump alluded to, Hal, China did flex this week. Before we get into the Trump piece of this, though, explain in layman's terms what China did that got his attention.
Well, what they're doing is they're restricting access to various materials like rare earths, which I should mention rare earths aren't rare, despite what it sounds like, and they are certainly not confined to China, although China does have a tremendous amount of rare earths in southern China where they actually do a lot of mining, but it's not restricted to that. But one thing they've done over the past 25 plus years is they have very strategically built a processing, refining, if you will, capability with these rare earths. And this was state sponsored, state supported, state underfunded, which meant that they could basically undercut global trade. So while the rest of the world is rushing into free trade and getting rid of tariffs across the board, China is pouring in all this money to basically undercut every place else that either mines rare earths or processes rare earths. And so what they ended up with was this huge disproportionate global presence in the rare earths side, and also in other things like things that I've consulted extensively with minerals tied to rechargeable batteries like lithium, to a lesser extent cobalt, graphite, things like that. And so I've had a lot of reasons to kind of do a deep dive into all this stuff, along with working with, places where we get that stuff here in the U.S. and elsewhere. And so what they did was very strategically, basically undercut the U.S. position. Now the U.S. and other countries are very dependent on rare earth access from China, so we're stuck. And China did this. And frankly, a lot of folks dealing with strategic risk have looked at this for years and says, we have got to kind of turn this around. We've been saying this for the last decade. We've got to start pouring money into this, or this day will come. And this day came.
Time in the White House, the time in D.C., I should say, 5:38 in the nation's capital. I feel like I've said the term rare earth minerals, Hal, more time this year than I have the rest of my life combined. Even though rare earths have been a huge piece of discussion this year, this, as you mentioned, it's certainly not a new discussion. What were you tracking rare earth mineral-wise with previous administrations, namely the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, and how those administrations dealt with this issue?
I think during much of the Obama administration, they just didn't really take it that seriously. You know, we had a pretty good relationship with China. China, we knew was trying to militarily become much more hegemonic in the region, but it didn't seem like we'd made that big shift. During the first Trump administration, I didn't see a lot of movement with rare earths across the board. And very frustratingly, when it was becoming absolutely clear during the Biden administration that we needed to do something much more concerted on this, again, I won't tell you what officials I talked to back in Washington D.C., but I would find myself repeating myself over and over again. Why aren't we trying to bring this back to the U.S.? Why are we leaving ourselves so exposed? What if China cuts back or cuts it off? What are we going to do? And there just didn't seem to be enough momentum, and that's something I will give President Trump credit for in his second term is that he took this on right away and started talking about our problem with rare earths, and with that I would include a basket of other minerals that are absolutely critical, and saying we've got to do something about this and get that back to the U.S. With not just the mining but also the processing capability. Now, China, I think, has looked at this where things are going with U.S. China relations, but also looking at their relationship with other countries around the world like Europe, and they have made a strategic decision that now is the time. And so they're going to play this card, if you will, where they're going to start restricting rare earth access. And probably it's a negotiating point where they're going to try and get a lot more consideration in other areas with this. We'll see how this all plays out. Interesting, the 100% tariff above other existing tariffs. That's the same thing that was being talked about as a number with the secondary tariffs with Russian oil. And I wouldn't be surprised at some point, in order to bring this 100% tariff thing back, someone tries to push in that Russian oil thing in there somewhere and say, oh, by the way, as long as you're making changes to accommodate getting this tariff taken away, why don't you quit importing all this Russian oil? I would not be surprised if someone tries to put that in the basket of reasons why we have this huge tariff, or if we want to increase the size of the tariff.
We do expect President Trump will make a swing through Asia at some point later this month. Will Trump have an opportunity to meet with President Xi, perhaps in or around the APEC summit when he's there?
That's an interesting point. Actually, this morning, he specifically pointed out, he says, I don't think I'm going to be meeting with Xi on that trip, which was very different from what everybody expected. In fact, the whole expectation going into this trip was that he was going to get some set aside time with Xi, and they were going to spend a lot of time talking about trade. And President Trump specifically said, I don't think I'll be meeting with Xi, and it's because of what's just happened. So there was no ambiguity as to why. And in diplomatic terms, that's about as straightforward as you're ever going to get, which is, I ain't doing this, and this is why I ain't doing this. And that's exactly what he said. So he's already kind of throwing down a diplomatic gauntlet to Xi, and frankly, at this point, with all the accolades that he's getting for what he did with Gaza and everything else, his status is very high in the global scene, and this action is obviously upsetting not just the U.S. but other foreign capitals, and I think this is just another way of putting pressure on Xi to change his position.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Hal, being generous with his time as always on these Saturdays. Hal is a retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and the host of the Strat podcast. What's the latest with Strat, Hal?
Well, this week there were a lot of things going on, and so I ended up talking about a lot of different things. I talked about what's going on in Gaza. I talked about some of the things going on with Ukraine and Russia, specifically the whole Tomahawk missile thing. And then I spent quite a bit of time getting into the issue of these National Guard deployments and the court decisions and the things that the courts are deciding upon with these National Guard deployments to major cities in the U.S. So it's not just one central theme. I actually touched on a bunch of things, but it was things that I felt that really needed to be sort of brought out in a much more intense, or much more, let's just say, much more involved sense.
Yeah. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Good to see you, Hal.
Hey, great to see you, Austin.